Good afternoon and welcome to the Fall 2019 semester of Records Management University. We are broadcasting live from Fife Media Studios in historic Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be getting started in just a moment. My name is Chris Petty, your Dean of Admissions and co-host of RMU, and I have a few housekeeping items before we begin. Because of our awesome turnout, we'll need to mute your phones and computer mics to avoid picking up any feedback or noise. If you have a question, please use the chat window located in the bottom right of the screen. I'll be monitoring the chat session and will respond directly, or if relevant to the discussion, we'll have Dean Mitch address it. Over the next few days, you'll receive an email on how to receive a copy of today's recording, as well as other instructions on all things RMU, including credits and certifications. To those wishing to receive credits for RMU, information about them will be handed out at the end of this semester. And to our students viewing this on demand, the credits do count just as much as viewing it live, although we do enjoy the live chat discussions. As you know, RMU is certified by the Institute of Certified Records Managers. It is an official credit qualifying course worth 1 certification maintenance point per class towards your recertification. To receive a pre-approval code for ICRM credits from Fife, you must attend all 5 classes live or listen to all of the recorded sessions. If you aren't able to participate in all 5 classes, you can still receive ICRM credits, but you'll need to submit your own justification. Additionally, RMU is certified with the Association for Information and Image Management, or AIM. You can receive certified information professional credits from AIM by your participation in the live or recorded sessions. And so, without further ado, I'm handing the wheel over to Mitch Farbstein, our esteemed Dean of RMU. Dean Mitch, take it away.
All right, Chris, thank you for the introduction. I always like to be esteemed. So welcome to the 5th class, the last class of the fall semester. We've had a great semester so far. Hopefully today we'll continue down that path. With no further ado on my side, these are the classes that we've had over the last 5 years. And next year, obviously, would be the 6th year. We will send out a survey, which, like we've done in the past, to get your feedback to see, how we can improve things that you think are too much in detail, not enough detail. We're always looking for that kind of feedback. You can see from this list that I've tried to come up with different themes that would keep your interest. So if you have any thoughts on that you'd like to propose, I'm open to exploring them. And it'll save me a little bit of brain power as well as I go through these. Okay, so the syllabus for this semester, you can see it there, the classes that we've had. Today's class is records are important, but we need to get our business cases under control. And I'll kind of explain how that plays into records management in a few minutes. But before we do that, Analysis Session 5, I am being analyzed. Organizational, technical, and application priorities. This is why I hate records management. Obstacles for achieving records management success. These are not all of them. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are the things that I'm thinking about all the time as I prepare for Records Management University. So there's always an ever-changing landscape of requirements. And as we've seen with technologies, in the last couple of years in particular, with tweets, with social media, with chats, and so on, the landscape continues to change, which requires a different type of technology in general. A standard records management solution in the back end will do it, but it's a capture of that, which is always changing and needs to consider the volumes that are now increasing because of that. Number 2, frequently adjusting the resource allocation. This is what we see a lot in implementing systems, that we're always seeing customers that have to adjust their resources, and whether they have the resources when the project begins and kind of falters as the project goes on, or vice versa. Understanding what resources are really involved in records management, depending on the size of your organization, is very important to understand up front. And because it changes, it always presents a little bit of a challenge going through the process. Did we get what we asked for? Did we ask for what we needed? This, I think, is key. Understanding what you're really looking for in a records management system, or a consultant, or somebody to help you improve your records management program. And if some of you are lucky enough to have a perfectly running records management system, you can ignore this. And also, did we ask for what we needed? Okay, did you understand what you needed, and why did you understand, or why did you think you needed that? And we see that particularly as people transition from physical records to electronic records, there's a different mentality as you move through that continuum, and it makes it a little bit more difficult because of the handling of physical records versus that of electronic records.
A perfect records management system. That's like a Shangri-La, utopia.
Well, yeah, I think we had that in about 2 semesters ago.
Exactly.
An idyllic place to be. Straying afar based on faulty process logic. And what I mean by that is we have this vision in our heads about how things should work until we actually have to implement them. And understanding exception processing and understanding how to, force the system to obey your rules when your rules aren't really logical in a lot of ways. It's one of the things that we wrestle with all the time. Who is in charge now to set the direction? We see this over and over where, systems take a while to implement. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes months, maybe years. It depends on how much of an enterprise system it is. It depends on how much you're trying to manage in your records management system versus other systems. And a lot of times, those folks at the higher level, the sponsors or senior management, change. And then that change requires sometimes a reset of direction, and who's in charge to do that. Rejustification, defending decisions established earlier in the project. Again, depending on how long the project's been going on, and it's records management, so it's been going on probably for a long time. You're always rejustifying, why do we do it this way? And as you weave that into number one, those decisions need to be revisited all the time. And then finally, track dilemma, or train track dilemma is what I call it in decision making. What that basically points toward is that decisions are made, and the bigger the engine, the bigger the train, the harder it is to change direction. And so you want to be able to make sure you're comfortable at the beginning that this is going to serve you long term. You're going to take a long ride. You're not going to have to, go and get on different tracks and so on. So this is the track dilemma in decision making. So all these things, when I think about them, I say, wow, look at all this. Geez, records management solutions should be easy to implement and sustain. I'm telling you now, from my experience, I know from Chris's experience, this is not really the case. It's an ongoing, challenging environment that you, as the records managers, and I've said this over and over, really have to take the helm on this and make sure that the organization is understanding the challenges of enterprise records management. Okay, so that leads us into the therapist du jour, which is Abraham Maslow. He's a psychologist, he's not a psychiatrist, but he's one of my favorites, and it's something, what he has professed and refined. Now he's dead, so he's not doing any more refining, but during the time he was alive and he was coming up with these theories, it really applied to a lot of the real world. And I think that was the important thing. And somewhat theoretical, but very applicable. So he attended Cornell, City College in New York, University of Wisconsin. Like most of the people that have been the therapists du jour, they have multiple degrees from different areas. He was a very prolific writer. He's the 10th most cited psychologist of the 20th century. So he had something to offer. Focused on exploiting human positivity versus human foibles. If you look at the folks that we've talked about in the last 4 classes, most of them looked at things that were, kind of negative, okay, in terms of the psychiatry or the psychology of what they were trying to help people, understanding death, understanding, the psychology of sexuality and so on, where he looked at it in a different way. He looked at what's the positive position that should be taken with psychology. And so what he came up with, the pinnacle of human development is self-actualization. I'll kind of get into that in a little bit. And hierarchy of needs, extremely influential in organizational behavior, how people behave and how do you motivate people and how do you make sure they are comfortable in their position to be as productive as possible. These are the kinds of things that he's focused in on. And I think it's very relative to records managers. And so he developed what was called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. A lot of you have probably have heard of it. Some may not have. But I find it a very profound view of how people become self-actualized, to be able to handle the world and be able to do it in a positive way. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, first you have to feel comfortable. You have to have food, right? You have to have rest. You have to have satisfaction in just being alive. Okay, the next is safety. Do you have a house? Do you have protection? Do you have money? Do you have the ability to go and do things beyond just the physiological and the safety reasons? And then you have to have these feelings of community, okay, and having friends and having spouses and having whatever you need, children, so you belong to something beyond yourself. And then it's esteemed of, was I successful in doing what I've done? And then you get to the pinnacle of this, which is the self-actualization point, where you say, yeah, I got command of my life. I can do things that I want to do. This is not much different than the processes that you will go through in a records management program. And I'll relate that a little bit more in a second. So you take Maslow's hierarchy needs, and then there's an embellishment of his theory over a number of years. And then they add the need to know and understand things, the aesthetic needs in one's life. And then you get to the point above self-actualization, which is transcendence. Okay, so this is really the updated version of.
Indeed, Mitch, just a quick note. I think the folks on the line are
behind.
There's a little bit of lag with the slide there.
Okay, I'm going to look at a different slide as we go. Okay, so this is a slide. We're catching up now. I was getting ahead of myself, I guess, or I'm faster than the speed of electricity, I guess. That works. So this is kind of the updated version of it, where there's a couple more slices that were added into it as people really started to internalize this whole notion of a hierarchy of needs. All right. So I said to myself, let's look at the hierarchy of needs for records management. So the idea here is, if you look at in records management, it is a hierarchy of achievement. And so what I looked at was, okay, the first thing you need to do is understand your record schedule and your categories and understand how to do that. The next part is, once that's established, you have to capture stuff that are your records, whether it's physical, electronic, it's email. Regardless of what it is, you have to capture something to put in your records management system. Then it's the categorization process. Is it minimal categorization? Is it big bucket categorization? Is it in-depth granular categorization, depending on what you want to do? The next step is, you have all this stuff now, you have it categorized, and now you have to be able to search and collect content. Because if you're never searching and collecting things and doing things with them, you just save everything by one date. Every 2 years, we're going to get rid of, the last year and approach it that way. Well, we know it's not that simple. And then there's processes involved in it. What do I do once I collect it and I search it? I have a process that has to flow. I have to approve. I have to distribute. I have to provide it to opposing counsel, whatever the case may be. And then finally, the disposition of it. Okay, so there is a life cycle here, and we've talked about life cycle many times, but it's a hierarchy. You can't get to number one if you don't go through 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. It just won't happen in a reasonable way. You can force it a little bit, but this is really kind of a generalized view of a hierarchy of needs of records management. So, and the hierarchy of needs may be high and steep, but getting to the top is possible with the right knowledge and experience. So I represent this in this view that most of you are familiar with, is chutes and ladders. You want to get to the top, but guess what? As you move along, you climb the ladders, and you fall down a little bit, you climb again. And this goes on through forever. You never really get to that number 100. All right, you're always trying to achieve that. So you're trying to reach high, high, high. So that leads me into today's malady, which is acrophobia, fear of heights, fear of getting too high, and fear of, what do I do now? And so acrophobia is kind of interesting, affects about 2 to 5% of the general population, and really has a lot to do with space and motion. as you get up higher, you're looking out in a different perspective. There's motion going on around you and how that influences you. One of the things, possibly conditioning or causing this is traumatic experiences while you're young. Maybe you fell out of a tree. Okay, maybe you fell off the roof. I think I've done several of those things. And I don't like to be high on a ladder anymore.
Isn't that you dangling your feet over there on the side of the building right there?
They would probably be boots at this point. That's how I feel some days before I do records at university. Should I or should I not?
One of our users says this concept is way too high.
So they also think it's possibly affected by balance and reduced visual cues and so on. So greater incidence in older people. So they typically find as you get older, there is a greater degree of this acrophobia. And there was a movie called Vertigo. In fact, it was just on 2 nights ago on one of my channels. And it's a fascinating movie, and it's pretty cool. It was James Stewart and Kim Novak. And for your older people, you probably do remember them as actors and actresses. And I don't want you to confuse that with arachnophobia now. So the big problem is they sound the same, but if you're standing on that building and you have arachnophobia or acrophobia, and you're also afraid of spiders, you pray there's no spider on that ledge.
Yeah.
You're going to be gone.
That's a bad day.
All right. So let's get into the real meat of today's presentation. And this is what we've done for the last 4 classes. I'll just refresh your memory as to why we're doing, kind of the psychological analysis that we're going to apply to records management. All right. What is the records management aberration? So I call that the exploration point. Why does the records management aberration exist? So we analyze why do these things and why are they happening the way they are? What needs to be done? And then we get to the next stage, who can help the organization become records management normal, whatever that means. What I did there, but let's go on. What are the available record management analysis protocols to get me through, to get to a better state of my records management program? What are the records management corrective actions to be taken? And how is the records management patient progressing? That's the resolution. How do we get to a better place than we are right now? Because you're not at a better place, you're falling back. Okay, so we're looking at the exploration. And I call this, kind of solution prioritization, because that's what it's about. If you remember, the opening was, I really want to do my records management stuff, but I have to get my business processes, my cases in order in this particular organization. So what they had in this organization were personnel reviews, and in support of both the employees, having access to the records, and litigation in case of a legal issue, and they use case management as the encompassing name of this. Okay, so we were working with human resources records, and as you all know, human resources records have a lot of personal information in them, okay, and they have to be protected from people who are not supposed to be seeing this. And obviously, these things are records in the organization. So it contained a lot of PII. We've talked about this through most of the classes this semester, where you have personal information that is collected on forms or in data for employee onboarding as they go through the resume submission, basically the review, multiple interviews and so on. You have the evaluations, and you have other things. Once you're an employee, you have payroll information, you have medical information, and all that typically will sit in your records management system. So we're in the exploration things. These are the things that this particular customer or implementation needed to consider before they started doing records management on this kind of information. Employees had access to their own records. So you had employees, and this is very true, your employees in an organization, you as a records management in your organization, you are entitled to look at the records that the organization is storing, okay? And you can request it. Okay, delivering that to you is typically the challenge because they have the records. Now they got to figure out security. They have to figure out, how do I flow this to you, and what are your rights to those records? Needed a cloud implementation due to limited resources, so they didn't have a lot of folks that from the IT side or any part in the organization to manage the infrastructure that was necessary to address these requirements. Employees, as I mentioned, can see their own records. And I call this a chicken and egg dilemma overall, because what comes first? Do you have the records and then you run them as cases, or do you have the cases that create the records? And so you, in your organization and how your organization looks at records, how do they determine what is the priority? Do we implement the records management system first? Do we implement the case management first and feed each other? That's why I call it chicken and egg. There's no real answer to that question. And you see this with other technologies within an organization. Again, we look at records management, okay, as a necessary evil, I would call it, unfortunately. Other things, and we've learned this in the industry, when it comes to spending money, organizations will spend a lot more money on things like case management, task management, other processes that manage the records. But the ability to manage those records through cases and tasks and e-discovery is dependent upon having a good records management system, which is dependent upon having a good document management system. So there's this hierarchy, there's this flow that I mentioned before. And this is what this particular customer needed to consider.
And D. Mitch, why is that? That case management and task management are seen as bigger priorities in records management?
They're productivity tools. Think about it. If I can assign from a task side, I can say, okay, Chris, you need to do this. And it's based on a hierarchy, okay? Because you have people that you report to and people that report to you, right? Unless you're at the bottom of the barrel. So when I assign Chris something to do, he can decide, well, okay, I can handle, or maybe I can handle, maybe I don't have access to certain type of information. I'm going to task it out to somebody else. And that whole trail of tasking is managed and people are notified. So the productivity goes up because it's delivered to you. It's delivered to Chris to do something. Chris has to react one way or the other to it. And by doing that, I can track what Chris is doing. I know, if he leaves the organization, I know the stuff doesn't get stuck. Right. I know where it is. And the same thing with case management. When I have to do, let's say, a FOIA case, or I have to do an e-discovery, I know that I have this collection of documents that need to be reviewed by somebody, maybe need to be redacted from a FOIA perspective, maybe needed to, have other things where people are collecting information and putting in this case. And then the case travels down a flow. Right? That's, very, very beneficial for increasing productivity. All right. And, you can always draw back into the hierarchy of needs. And if the bottom level of the needs of safety and all those things are already addressed, people will become more productive. So it's weird, but this stuff really does tie all together when you have to think about the global aspects of implementing enterprise type of records management systems.
Definitely.
Okay, so we'll leave our chicken and egg, or our turkey and egg, I guess it's I should say. So we get into the analysis portion of it and discover the life cycle of the case management to records process. How do we get from case management to records? And so again, if you look at the chicken and egg, part of it is, do my records exist now? And now I'm putting them into the case, or do I have the case and I'm collecting information from disparate systems that aren't really in my records management system? And both are viable approaches, and they exist today. And so understanding that life cycle, understanding the starting point to the end point, and records management, again, doesn't stand on its own. As we've presented in previous classes, there's other technologies that tie in and related, whether, like I said before, it's FOIA, it's discovery for scientific research. they need to know, the individual needs to know, where do I go to find this stuff? And what can I do when I find it? And sometimes they're not allowed in the records management system, but there needs to be a process in there where they, inquire, or they ask for this information, or they ask for emails, whatever the case may be. So this is a whole continuum of the beginning of the life cycle to the end of the life cycle, and working together. And this is what this organization was challenged with. Okay, determine where case content originates. Always a challenge. You have different systems. You don't just have a records management system. You don't just have a document management system. You have financial systems. You have manufacturing systems. You have personnel systems. A lot of these systems are your feeders, are creating the real records. The records management system typically does not create the record. Right? It's getting that record from somewhere else, and understanding where it originates, and understand how you get those records into the records management system, or how do you declare it was a record in the first place. Very complex stuff, very IT challenging to come up with the ways of moving that, or at least having the metadata related to those documents or the content that you want to have in your records management system. Review how to address discovered PII. What do I do with it? Okay, so I get Chris's, hiring document or personnel file or whatever, social security number. You could have his address. You could have, how many kids he has, what their names are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Think about it when you sign up for insurance. Okay, or you sign up with something that has a beneficiary. There's a paper. There's something you're signing up. Whether it's on an electronic form, it's a piece of paper you submit to the HR people, whatever. This is a record that has to be maintained, okay? And then what do you do when you finally, import it into the system, if you're not keeping this physical records, and there's PII all over the darn thing? And there will be, okay? So how do you isolate that? You're typically not going to go in and redact it or cover all that up, but you want to put a higher level of security on those records that have the PII in them. So you need to have a plan or a program to figure out, okay, found PII, what am I going to do with it now? How do I quarantine it? So another part of the analysis was establish security and access rules. Who has access to these records, both while the records in the records management system and kind of the associated technology, which in this case we're talking about case management. And while this record is going through the case management system, what are the security and access rules to that? And so that's another thing that needed to be understood within this organization. The other thing that applies to that too is what kind of organization it is. Is it international? Is it government? You have extremely complex rules that go along with having international employees, let's say, for example, and where their particular records are stored, and the GDPR and the California rules and things we talked about in the past. Again, as another layer to the complexity of implementing these systems. I'm not giving you the way to exactly address it, because there isn't one, okay? It's how your organization perceives this, but I think it's your role as a records manager to at least understand this and raise these issues. And I think what it says about you is, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. You can't just tell me implement the records management system and not have a lot of other people involved in it. Okay, how's a case initiated? So let's say there's a legal suit because of some hiring practices, and the case gets initiated by whom? Okay, is it opposing counsel? Is it your counsel? Is it the employee themselves? Do they have a way to initiate it in a form or a formal submission? Because that formal submission becomes, guess what? It's a record. Whether it's a form, it's an email, it's a piece of paper. How does it get initiated? Because that is the starting point for, in this particular case, the HR case that's being brought against the organization. When does the case content become a record? Okay, does everything become a record as soon as it's added to the case? So it's coming from external systems. It's not really a record in the records management system. So now I take it and I add it to the case. So when does that record become, or when does that piece of content become a record? And it gets more complex when you start throwing in physical records that you're moving around as well. What is the case approval process? So once the case is collected, who has to approve it? What rights, again, all the documents in that case may not be exposed to all the individuals who have to approve the process. You may have, primary, secondary, tertiary approvers in this process. And so that needed to be considered as well. So you can see the complexity that this starts creating, and records just aren't sitting out there. Nothing's happening with them. They're all part of some process that typically will take place along the life cycle of that record. Again, there's this interplay between when does a record become a record and when does a record be part of a case, and when does a record just sit there dormant for 15 years and you just get rid of it. There's all these different interplays that take place. Okay.
Dean, Mitch, one question from our audience, just asking if there's any sort of standard rules on records management or policy. And I would say that's a very broad question, because it kind of depends on the type of organization you are. Because I know there's, certainly the federal government follows NARA guidelines.
Right.
Depending whether or not you're state government or local government, they have sort of their own policies around that. And then, as you mentioned before, GDPR certainly impacts a lot of private organizations as well.
Yeah, I would love to say, here's a list, here's the book that tells you exactly how to do this. And part of my dilemma, and it goes back to why I hate records management, I'm always trying to think, what are the main things you absolutely unequivocally have to be concerned about? And it really goes toward, why are you saving records, and what do you want to do with them? Do you want to use them for other things within the organization, whether it's, patent protection, whether it's manufacturing of drugs? It really doesn't matter. These things are discoverable information. And as the world moves forward, this is the big problem with cybersecurity right now. Okay, they're important records in a lot of cases. Not all records are extremely important. Okay, nobody wants to know, the record for when you repaired somebody's car in your organization and the cost of doing that. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. You want to have it for financial audit ability and so on, but they're not critical records. And that's what you have to start looking at. What are my critical records? What are the things that I have to absolutely be concerned about, and focus on those? Okay. I'm not saying it's the first thing that you do, but it eventually is the most important thing you're going to do, because those are the records you got to protect. Those are the records you got to get rid of based on what your legal team or whatever says you want to keep them for this time. And there are industry standards about that. Mm-hmm. Again, you go back to NARA with the government, you go back to, other the nuclear industry, whatever it may be, you're supposed to keep them for a certain period of time. And it also applies internationally as well. And each country has different rules for this. You got GDPR beating on a company that's also based in California, that's also doing business with China. I mean, it's tough. So the answer to your question is no, there is no specific way of doing it. All right, I need 1 second to take a drink. It's my half-hour break drink.
Also, more of a comment from our audience says you should never. The first step in good ECM is not to make it an IT issue.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I will not argue that point. But reality, I like to deal in reality sometimes. Reality is, a lot of cases, and we've seen it. The RFP, the decision making, the selection of the vendor, the records manager does not have participation in it. Mm-hmm. What happens is they say, okay, records manager, what do you need? The records manager creates something, a document, they give it to the IT people, but guess what? The IT people, that's not their expertise. So they're trying to say, okay, it needs this, and this, put it in the requirements document and we'll be done. but it's not the case. That's where you go back to what I said earlier, that are you getting what you wanted?
Right.
Okay. And if you're just handing over the IT, I can tell you pretty much all the time, you're not going to get what you need to do the right thing in records management. Okay, so we come to corrective actions. What kinds of things did we do? Create the process design document based on the analysis. This gets down into, you've selected a vendor, or you have a vendor in there, and you're trying to expand the system. What does the design look like? What are you trying to do? What if you isolate this specific thing? Is the first step. What are you trying to accomplish? What are the goals? And then how does that fit into the infrastructure that I've already created? Or if you're just implementing it for the first time, what infrastructure do I need to make sure that I'm addressing these kind of issues? So this design document is very important. And there's a secondary step. It needs to be reviewed. And as we've seen with a lot of our customers, not a lot of, but customers in general, not just from Fight's perspective, the design document is in a lot of cases not understood. And it's not that it's complex. People don't want to spend the time really reading it. They think, we selected vendor, everything will be fine at the end. That's when you get into issues later on in terms of acceptance of the system. And the design, you need some kind of document that says this is the definitive acceptance document. So when we get to the end point and go to production, did I get what I really wanted to? And it can't be arbitrary. It needs to be something that's written up front and everybody approves it. Utilize the standard case management functionality. In this particular case, functionality comes with the case management system. And what they needed to do is not try to take the base functionality and change it all up. And the real implication of that is that in the future, when you do upgrades and the vendor comes out with new releases, you don't break all the things that are already out there, and not try to force fit it into the way you do your business. Because what you typically are looking at is most organizations want, computer off the shelf or COTS solutions, meaning that, you go in, you buy Word from Microsoft or something. It's, this is kind of the way it works. If you want to go modify it, yes, you can do that. All right. Bring in the consultants, bring in your technical people to do it. But be careful what you break and how difficult it will be to upgrade the system. So we typically stress use the standard functionality, change the way you do your business, because typically you're looking at, you're suggesting these changes, but they may be, as I talked about earlier, they may not be logical, but you're doing it because that's the way you've done business always in the past. So be flexible. Everybody has to compromise, and you need to sometimes have workarounds to that. Tailor the workflow process and rules to the specific user needs. Okay, you want something that you can tailor, you can change a little bit, and you want to tailor it. You don't want to customize it. And this becomes an important thing, again, going forward. Take advantage of the base product that you've evaluated and decided to go with. Use it as out of the box as you can. Tailor the fundamental records lifecycle process. That you have a lot of control over in a lot of ways. Hopefully, the product that you have or you are looking to acquire or you're evaluating in the future. The lifecycle process usually has a standard or fundamental workflow in it. Okay. The next steps are you have to be able to add things like your retention and disposition schedules, your categorization, your disposition, and how you want to handle that. Do I send it to 3 people to review the disposition, or I send it to 1 person to review the disposition? What happens at the end, let's say in a government situation where I have to, export the information and send it to NARA, session it to NARA? How does that work? Understanding those fundamental records management lifecycle processes in your evaluation of the product are instrumental. You don't want to try to change all of that. It's going to be too complex. And then you just need to make sure that it's accommodating for other types of technologies that you're going to encounter in the future, whether it's, tweets, it's social media. How is that going to play? Understanding that's important. There's a lot of systems out there that have been there for years. They really can't accommodate the new technologies that are coming out. So it's understanding the flexibility, and that flexibility typically comes because you're taking it with its base functionality and just, enhancing some of it as you go along in terms of how you use it. Number 6, integrate case and records management functionality into a holistic solution. This is absolutely what they wanted, and it's important that this is seamless, that when I have a case that I've put records into that came from my records management system, or I created new content, and sometimes you do in a case management system, I'm creating a letter, okay, that needs to go along with this, or I'm filling out a form that needs to go along, and it wasn't a record in the first place, so it was nothing, it was just a form. So now I got to make sure that this flow is very, very important. And whether I'm talking case management, I'm talking task management, I'm talking any other kinds of management, of document management, how does this stuff move from your document management system into your records management system? For this organization, again, we're getting to a high level view of records management here by using case management as an example. All right. Again, records management content isn't isolated. It needs to be available to do other things with. Okay, develop an operational test script and documentation. Is it doing what I wanted it to do? Again, getting back to the earlier things that I say. Am I getting what I wanted to get? There needs to be a test script so you can run that script against the processes that you think you're implementing, and you can share that with multiple people. This test scripting and the documentation are critical when you get towards, moving from a test environment to a production environment. Okay. It also applies not in a new system, but also in existing systems where you're implementing new technology. If you have a system in there that you haven't upgraded or you haven't added additional functionality to in 10 or 15 years, you probably have a very outdated system. It's ready to sunset. You got to find something, and you may not have done it because it was too costly to do it, but that's not going to carry you into the future as the world changes. And take corrective process flow actions pre and post production. If something isn't working right, work with the vendor, work with your IT group, work with whomever you can to refine that. It may not give you exactly the process you want, but it should, if nothing else, make the system more productive, make the users more productive. So little tweaks here, little tweaks there are not bad. And you need to do that because not one, size fits all. Okay, so now we get to the resolution point. Train users on the integrated case and records management. Obviously, you have a big community. We've just implemented a system worldwide, and we had to train the trainers, and there were like 280 trainers that we had to train. And how do you do that in a worldwide environment? So that's something that needed to be addressed and understood. So in a big organization, to bring it back to HR, you may have HR people all over the world in different countries with different rules. And so they need to understand the base part of this and then hope that it can be tweaked to their particular requirements in that country. Initiated a filter, identify, and label PII. So nobody's going to sit there and review every document that's in the system and that's coming in the system or that already exists in the system. You need some automated filters to be able to find the PII. And that can be done rather easily. Nothing's 100%. But then when it's identified and kind of in the data table indicated that it has PII in it, doesn't matter what kind of PII, then you put a layer of extraction on there and say who and who can't take a look at that information. So they weren't going to do that by hand. Establish access rights based on caseworker, employee, records manager. Each one of these individuals in this particular case for HR had different access rights, and they have to be honored. It could be based on who you are, based on what country you're in. It could be based on the type of document it is. It can be based on the kind of PII that might be in the document. Again, a lot of different considerations, all related back to records management and understanding these kind of processes. Created dynamic dashboards and static reports for process activity. Everybody wants to know how much stuff are we doing in the system? And you want to know it. The general user may not really care about that, but senior management needs to know that. And senior management wants to see that there's a lot of stuff being tracked and managed, because then they feel, yeah, we spent the money. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of controls that we have now that we didn't have in the past. Determine that once a case is closed, content is recordized. If you look up recordized in the dictionary, it doesn't exist. And I think over the years, a lot of us who have been in records management say, okay, there's stuff out there that has to be transitioned from some kind of content to a record. Okay, and it could be just data, it could be raw data to do that. So they determined that once a case, was closed, then the content was automatically recordized. Okay, with typically the metadata that's been associated when they first put it into the case. You can't put something in the case if it doesn't have any data about it, because you can't really track it, you can't float it, you can't do really much of anything. So you have to put some metadata in there. And so at that point, when the case is closed, that's when it becomes a record. They didn't make every document that's put into the case, a Word document, spreadsheet, a record immediately. They waited till the whole thing was completed, and then the case became recordized, because the retention disposition schedule for that case should be consistent across the content. Recordizing activity, audit trail, and then manage as a record. So you have all this activity going on. You want to audit it. You want to know who did what when, because if it ever goes to court, they want to make sure you're following standard procedures and so on. And so what we did was we took all that data in the database and we made it a record, and we stored that. We weren't going to save the whole database in the records management system. You want to take the activity and have a recordization. Recordization is basically, instead of printing it to a piece of paper and scanning it back in, they basically take it and they create a PDF of that data. And then we get to case closed. So let the fun begin. And so this particular customer of Fife, very successful. It's working back and forth, and now they're looking at other things like adding a task component of it. Again, if you get the foundation piece, which is your records management solution, really in place, okay, I prefer it to be a first thing, not a last thing. But what we have seen is most organizations are far more ahead on their legacy applications, on their case systems, their tasking systems, again, because that's where they got their productivity. Now they're saying, I got all these records, I got all this information, I really should have a solid records management system behind this for going both ways. Okay, any questions, Chris? Do I need to stop, or are we good?
No questions so far.
Okay, so as we've done in the past 8 weeks, consciousness list. So we're just down to the fifth one, because it's the fifth class, how have my past records management experiences influenced my records management philosophy? So that's the fifth one. And am I staying up, or we got it behind
a little
again?
bit of lag there in the slide.
Okay. We shall wait.
So it's catching up.
Okay, were we pretty much on up until this?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, you're the guy who's watching, right?
Yeah, just a little bit of lag there. And I know some folks have said from time to time there's a second or two that cuts out with the audio.
Yeah.
That's just unfortunately it's just one of those connection issues.
Yeah, we're still waiting up here too to get to the consciousness. It's kind of weird. We haven't had this problem up until now, have we?
We have not. Yeah,
No.
It seems like perhaps this might be an internet issue.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it must be, because we've never had it coming out of our studio here.
Yeah.
Okay. I know last week we even dropped some of the audio for some weird reason.
It looks like we've caught up.
Yep, I think we're good. Okay, We had a little chat. What have I learned from my past experiences? Positive. What do I evaluate what I've done in the past? Did I initiate any minor or major changes to my records management process, and what were they? Again, these are things that you think about. these have no answer. I can't give you an answer to any of these. There's things that you might want to think about if you haven't done this. Have been able to incorporate any new types of records that did not exist 5 and 10 years ago? Or am I kind of, running stagnant just to keep ahead of the game right now, and I don't even have time to implement new technologies in my records management solution? Another one, go back to 3 for a second, is, have you talked to your vendor? Have you reviewed what your vendor has been coming out with too, and what the new functionality that they can provide to you? Or are you not on maintenance and they won't talk to you? Some of these things have to be considered. Have I had exposure to more than 1 or 2 implementations that I have built upon? The greatest, the people that I have seen most successful in records management have not done this one time. They've done it 3, 4, 5 times in different organizations, different types of organizations. Those are the ones that tend to be the most successful because they have that broader experience that's important, like in anything. Have I changed my original approach to working with management, IT, governance? I don't think you were even heard 10 years ago to any great extent. I think now you are being listened to more so, and that's what's going to be important in terms of the full success of your organization. Am I where I expected to be at this point in my records management career? So think about that. Is this where I really wanted to be, or am I satisfied? Am I reaching self-actualization? Have I gotten through the base stuff and now I'm having fun with this? Or I'm feeling successful and I have great esteem? Again, it's the whole ties back into this hierarchy of needs. Okay, so let us help you help yourself. You've seen a lot of stuff here that are pyramid oriented. So you'll have that ingrained in your brain tonight when you go to bed.
Indeed, Mitch, I'm just looking at the slide right there. Oh, yeah, we've
got it. Okay. Yeah, keep me on target here, man. Okay, so things that will help you to reach self-actualization in records management. You have to have patience. Okay. You have to understand your requirements. You got to understand your processes, or at least your processes tied to everybody else's processes, and how the records get generated and into the records management system. How you handle budget. Am I going to have money going forward? Can I pay for maintenance going forward on the system I have so the vendors will continue talking to me and selling me new stuff? Do I have the resources, whether they're other records managers, assistant records managers, people that are, driving the vans around? What are the resources you need for both your physical and your electronic records? Acceptance, do you accept the state that your program is? And is there acceptance from the general, organizational community about records? And again, gets back to, do they care? They don't care, it's a challenge. Migration, okay, understanding, going from one system to another, whether it's a physical record system, it's electronic record system, all systems typically get migrated over the life of records. We've seen this. We've seen a lot of systems being sunsetted right now. They needed to update their technology, and with, they don't want to really rebuy what they already have. So a lot of them are looking at other vendors to migrate to. And change, okay? That's how you get to self-actualization. You have to change, and you have to force change on the people around you to meet some of the goals that are also moving while you're trying to. So everything is always changing, and you need to be prepared for it and not get frustrated by it. And so you don't want to end up like this, but hopefully you won't. And hopefully that Records Management University has opened your eyes to some things that you may not have considered before, and will prevent you from going down this path. Okay, always going back to the Fife Records Management Community site is great to get further insight from, the experiences of your cohorts, the people who are also in the same boat as you in terms of implementing, and they may be in bigger boats or they may be in smaller boats, but they're rowing, they're trying to get to a destination. And I think having this forum to share that information helps everybody. It helps me too, as I read through this. Okay, so this is, I excerpted one thing I saw I thought was kind of interesting, and somebody was talking about disposition. I've mentioned this in the past. Disposition, you can take a whole course on disposition. It's a very complex process, and it needs to be looked at very, very closely. But in this particular case, this individual said, I run a report on the database, okay, for the current year of what they have in their system. I export it to an Excel file, sort it by office or department, verify there is any material flagged or disposal hold, send an individual list to each department's responsible person of authorizing destruction. After receiving the authorizations, edit if necessary, the master list and database, sent the destruction work order for execution. A lot of steps there, a lot of manual steps there, a lot of movement, a lot of inability to track, did somebody really complete their tasks? All right, so all this really points to, and I know there were some comments back to this individual, this is a very complex approach to disposition, and it needs to be simplified, especially if you're in an organization that has a lot of stuff on an annual basis that needs to be disposed of. So anyway, I thought these were interesting comments. These are the kinds of things that people pose on the FITE community. All right, so this is FITE's bridge logic hierarchy. This is my commercial break for 30 seconds. This is how we view the hierarchy of records management. You have infrastructure, you have digital capture, digital repository, integration, and workflow. And that's all surrounded by the reporting, the records management, and security and auditing. And so we try to simplify this, but we also know that the whole process, is greater than this, greater than the whole type of thing. Greater than the parts, I should say. So here are some of the upcoming events the FITE will be attending. I think one of the first or second digital government I will be presenting at, but we'll probably send out notices before this, because both of these are before the next class we're going to have. Okay, so if any of you attended ARMA, maybe you can find yourself in one of these pictures. And so we appreciated all the people that stopped by the booth, had good conversations with everybody, learned a lot from them. I noticed that the blue shirt is slimming more so than the white shirt. So
indeed, Mitch, I'm looking at our slides here. It looks like we're still sort of waiting for our users to see it. So
you hit the computer, Chris. Come on.
So it's a bit of a tease right now as you're describing
it. People are waiting.
I know.
We got 5 minutes. We're in good shape today. Oh, you know what? It may take a little while because there's the slide's big with all the images.
But typically folks do like to know kind of our upcoming events, so we've got some extra focus on that today.
Yeah.
One question while we kind of wait for our other slide to pop up here. One of our users asked, how can they approach their senior officer about changes to be made to categorization? That person thinks they should be static. The categorization process.
The categorization process, static meaning.
I'm sort of inferring here that they don't want to make a change to how they categorize their documents.
Okay. One of the reasons they don't want to is because they don't have to. Okay. It's a silly answer, but that's true. Unless there's some regulation or whatever to force that, why bother? Because they know if you have to recategorize stuff, means somebody has to go in there and change all the dates of disposition or retention schedule for each one. Not true. Okay. What you do is you take that category and it has, the connection to all the records in there, and you change it once and it folios through all of it. So it's, it's a 2-minute exercise.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think it's just being scared of the unknown, thinking you have to touch every one of these. Somebody has to go into every email and change the category for that. And again, if you keep it at a big bucket level and don't go too granular, it's a much simpler process.
Okay, great. Okay. And I see our pictures are now
displayed. Yeah. Okay. Still, the blue shirt makes me look slower. But this is just, hopefully if you're out there in the audience and you see yourself, that's great. We loved having you to the booth. It was a very good turnout, great show. And we had other people as well. So we probably had, we didn't get pictures of everybody, but we had, well over 100 people from RMU that stopped by. And, it's just a small representation of the 1,400 people who were registered for this semester. So I'm glad you keep coming back, and the plan is to keep doing this. All right. So we're moving to the next slide. And guess who's next on the couch, Chris?
I'm going to say it's you.
There I am, me. I definitely need my head examined after 60 plus RMU classes that are all different. So anyway, it's always great. I learn a lot when I'm creating the class. I learn a lot with the feedback that the audience provides to us. So if there are any burning questions, I know we're heading up to the top of the hour at this point. We are at the top of the hour. Anything burning out there, or we go okay?
No burning questions. I think most folks are just asking how to get copies of the presentation, and that information will be sent out.
Yeah, that gets
Yep.
sent out, and since this is the last class, following up on that will be the how to get the credits and everything.
Yep. So that will be forthcoming.
And then I wanted to mention this at the beginning, or did I, about the survey?
You did.
Yeah, I did. Okay, just want to make sure I got that in. And so let's put that fire out. And see you spring 2020. Enjoy the winter. And try to avoid any RMU White Walkers.
Hopefully that's not us.
I was gonna put our pictures on there, but I think you gotta have the face to really get the reference. So, all right, Chris, that's it for this semester.
Yeah,
I know you're saddened by that.
I am. It's been another fantastic semester, and really that's in part because of our students and those who dial in for every one of these classes. So thank you all for participating. Continue to participate in the community forum, and we hope to see you next semester. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.